So when I was in year 7, every like Wednesday, I think it was, we used to do an activity, and one of the activities was just dance, or there was like a puzzle, or like reading. But no one ever wanted to do reading, so we always like voted for just dance. And me and my friends like were in the back, like we had to make like a bicycle or something, or was it like a horse? I don't even remember, but it was like, let me just show you, hang on. So yeah, and I was always this guy, because I don't really know why, I was just always this guy. And then I remember my friend was like sitting on top of me, well, not sitting on top of you, you know what I mean, and then she fell, and I felt like I broke my neck. I probably didn't, but it really hurt. And we always won, because we were just the best, you know, the best. Some teachers just really get on my nerves, you know? I don't know what planet they're on, but they definitely are just built different. Here's an example. When you need to go to the toilet, you politely put your hand up and say, "Miss, can I go to the toilet?" "No, you should have gone at lunch." "I'm sorry, Karen, but I can't control my bladder. You know, at lunch, when I'm eating and drinking, it gets digested, and then later on, I need to go to the toilet. It will take me 5 minutes at max. Probably not even 5 minutes. Considering our lessons are like an hour long, I'm sure that's not too much of an issue, is it?" And then sometimes they're just like, "Okay, but you need to wait until so-and-so gets back." I need to go to the toilet. I don't care about talking to anyone. I want to go to the toilet. I don't care about that. What do you think we're going to do in there? Just sit and chat for the rest of the lesson? No. And then they're like, "Don't want you having a bit of a mother's meeting in there." Oh my god. And the scariest thing in school is when they put the I can't even say it, the name on the board. Ah! Is it just me? Like, when you're watching YouTube, or like anything that has adverts, and an advert pops up, and it's just like, "Writing's not that easy, but Grammarly can help. This sentence is grammatically correct, but it's wordy and hard to read." It's like, no! I don't want Grammarly! I can write! I can read! I don't need this! And then it has the audacity to be like, "Are you sure you want to skip this advert?" Yes, I'm sure I want to skip it! So here's a little story time for you guys. When I originally made this account, I was gonna make it like one of those commentary videos, where people like take like bad videos and like talk seriously about them, about why it's wrong, and it's definitely not turned into that account. My first video actually got taken down for online bullying. I wasn't even being mean to anyone. And I was like, this is rubbish. I'm just going to post a random video about my mum. And then I logged out. And then it kind of blew up. So I logged back in and I was like, you know what? Let's keep this account. It's kind of weird because I wasn't like trying to gain anything from this account. But I ended up getting quite a lot. And I'm really thankful for it. But I kind of forgot that I originally had this account for that. Hello. I have a really funny story time to tell you all. So yeah, so I was playing Tower of Hell and I was on like the pro towers, and when I got to the top, there was like this whole entire gang of like copy and pastes, and they full on like, they started attacking me. Well, not attacking me, but they were literally saying like, "Oh my god, imagine having that style." So I decided to ask them if they had TikTok. And they said yes, so I asked them, like, what's their users and how many followers they have and all that jazz. And they told me they aren't going to tell me the user, but they said they had 2,000 followers, which is apparently more than I have. How do I tell them?
Storytime about why my mom kicked me out when I was 16. So a little background information. This had all started as soon as my dad left my mom and I. I was like 13 around the time. Well, ever since then, my mom would have different guys in and out of the house all the time. Like, we were lucky if a month went by and she was still with the same dude. Which, I mean, I kind of get it because my dad did leave us for a woman that he had started another family with. But at the same time, it was just a whole mess. Anyway, so she had got with this new guy, and we're gonna call him Tyler. And by the way, the dudes that she would date, they would literally live at our house. Anyway, so a week after he moved in, I started getting really close to him, which usually never happens. Usually I would try to keep my distance because I knew how wrong it was of her having all these different guys in the house when I'm only 16. Anyways, every time that my mom would go to work, he would invite me to go see a movie, and he would just be really flirty with me. And he was only 6 years older than me, and my mom was 32. You do the math. Anyways, for part 2. Crazy story time about the girl that my dad was having an affair with. So a little background information. My mom and my dad had been married for 10 years. And they had 3 children. Me, who's the oldest, I'm 16. And then my 2 younger sisters. Well, since I was 12 years old, I've lived with my grandma. Because of some personal issues that went on at home. Well, because I lived with my grandma, I barely ever saw my family. Because she lived like an hour away. So I was never in any family photos or anything like that. Well, when I was 15, my dad started coming to my grandma's every Friday and taking me out for pizza. And I thought it was because he just wanted to spend time with me. Well, a few months after he started taking me out for pizza every Friday, I found it really odd that he was getting a hotel for the whole weekend and only seeing me on Fridays. So I had talked to my grandma about it. So my grandma told me that he was having an affair. And she said that she didn't care because she absolutely despised my mom. I didn't tell my dad that I knew because I just thought that it would cause issues between us. Well, the next Friday he came up and we went to the pizza place for part 2. Part 2 about the girl that my dad was having an affair with. So like I said, a few weeks later, on a Friday, he takes me out for pizza again. Mind you, we go to the same pizza place every single Friday. Well, we sit down, we're waiting for our pizza, and I notice that there's this girl who keeps staring at me. And I'm like brushing it off, thinking that she's just one of those girls who has an RBF, resting bitch face. So once we were done eating, my dad went to pay. But the pizza place that we were at, they only accepted cash and not card. My dad had to go to the bank, which was like 2 doors down, so it really didn't matter. As soon as he got up and walked out that door, the girl who was staring at me the whole time came straight over and sat down where he was sitting. I'm like, hi. And she just starts going off on me, but not so everybody could hear. She's like, what the fuck is your name? Like, is he cheating on me? Blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I'm his daughter. She said, no, you're not. He showed me pictures of his daughters before. Like I said before, I wasn't in any family photos. For part 3. Part 3 about the crazy ass girl that my dad was having an affair with. So like I said, she comes over, she sits down. She thinks she's confronting me about being just some random girl that my dad's cheating on her with. And then like I had said earlier, I was not in any family photos because I had lived with my grandma for years. So she was like, oh, like, no, he showed me pictures of his kids and stuff like that. So because she thought that I was lying, she went up and tried to fight me. But I grabbed this bitch by her hair and I fucking dragged her. Of course, while I'm beating the shit out of her, my dad walks in. He's like, oh my god, what are you doing to her? Let her go, blah, blah, blah. Everybody else is freaking out at this point. We get kicked out. The cops get called. She goes to jail because originally she put her hands on me. And I decided to press charges. Even though my dad begged me not to. So then I confronted him about the fact that he only came up once a week to spend one Friday with me, but he got a hotel and spent the whole weekend with her. So now I still live with my grandma. I don't see my dad anymore. He's still having an affair with this girl. I'm still really pissed off about it, so I kind of just want to tell my mom what he's doing. Story time about why I made my boyfriend stop being friends with his girl best friend. So a little background information. I was in my sophomore year of high school, and my boyfriend and I had been dating for about 6 months. And he had been best friends with this girl, we're gonna call her Addie, for about 3 years. Now, I had known Addie way before that, probably since we were in kindergarten. But her and I weren't like BFFs, we were more of acquaintances. But obviously, we became friends because she was always around my boyfriend. A month after him and I started dating, I decided that we had to set boundaries for their friendship. Because they had first period together, right? Well, every morning at 9:45, I would go on Snapchat and I would see a picture of them. And it would be her kissing him on the cheek. Not only would it be on her story, but it would also be on his. And I had her on Snapchat before that. She had never done that, ever. So he said that he had talked to Addie about it, right? And things were good for the next 2 months. Then they were forced to work together on a project. For part 2. Part 2 about why I made my boyfriend stop being friends with his girl best friend. So like I said, they had been forced to work together on a school project. At least that's what he told me. So I brushed it off because I was not about to seem like the jealous girlfriend. Well, the next day, him and I were supposed to go out to the movies. So I texted him right before we were about to leave, and I said, hey, are you on your way to get me? He goes, OMG, no, I'm sorry, I forgot. I have to work with Addie on this project. She's about to come over my house. So at this point, I'm like really pissed off. So I text him and I say, I thought you guys had a whole week to work on this project. Why does it have to be tonight? Addie knew that him and I were supposed to go to the movies that night also. He said, we just want to get it done really quickly so that way I can spend the rest of the week with you. And she's snapping me the whole time that she's at his house off of his phone. So at around 1:30 a.m., I get a Snapchat from her on his account and she's laying on his chest. Like for part 3. Part 3 about why I made my boyfriend stop being friends with this girl best friend. So like I said, she snaps me at 1:30 in the morning a picture of her laying on his chest and it's captioned, Hey girlie, I hope you don't mind, but I have to spend the night at his house. He lost track of time working on our project and it's way too late for him to take me home. So at this point, I'm furious and I don't snap her back. So the next morning, I call my boyfriend. And I asked him, hey, is Addie still there? So he says yeah, and then I ask him to put me on speakerphone. So when he does, I say hi to Addie. She goes, OMG, hey girl, how are you? And that's when I pretty much go off on this bitch. I tell him that while he was asleep, she was sending me pictures of her laying on top of him off of his Snapchat. And that she was sending those type of pictures to multiple people on his Snapchat. Because my best friend had texted me that morning, saying that she thought that we broke up because Addie was sending her pictures of her laying on top of him. So I tell him, pick, me or her. And she starts crying. After a minute of silence, he hangs up the phone and then blocks me. Good luck to the next girl. Storytime about how my dad was on the news and now everybody knows my last name. So a little background information. This all happened whenever I was in 6th grade. This all happened on a Tuesday night. So I had school the next day. Well, my dad had went to work earlier in the day. Well, around 10 o'clock at night, we hadn't heard from my dad all day, which was super weird for him because he was always home around 10 o'clock. And even if he wasn't, he still would have kept in contact with us and let us know where he was at. So at this point, my family and I were really scared, and we're thinking that something happened to him. I was calling and texting him, my mom was calling and texting him. My whole family was pretty much trying to get a hold of him. Like, we had called all the hospitals to see if he was there. We called police stations to see if he might have been in jail or if they had his last name in the system. So nobody had heard or seen from him. So we all went to sleep that night hoping that he would show up in the morning. So the next day after I got home from school, my mom came home from work and she had told me about this phone call that she got. Like for part 2. Part 2 of how my dad was on the news and now everybody knows my last name. So like I said, my mom had gotten home from work and she told me about this phone call that she got while she was at work. So apparently one of her coworkers called her and said, hey, I think I saw your husband on the news. So after that, she showed me the news article and I couldn't even believe what I was reading. So I guess my dad had been drinking and he went to an auto repair shop and stole a car because I guess the keys were left in the door of the car. And what makes this even worse, the car that he stole had 2 guns in the trunk. And they weren't 2 pistols, these were 2 big ass guns that were fucking loaded. Oh wait, I forgot something. So before this, he had been at the strip club and somehow he ended up in pink lingerie. Guys, I cannot make this shit up. So he was driving around and he decided to park right in the middle of an intersection and it was literally causing a whole fucking scene. There were people with their kids worried as hell. So after that, a few people called the cops, like for part 3. Part 2 about how my dad was on the news and now everybody knows my last name. So like I said, my dad parked in the middle of an intersection and people were calling the cops. So when the police arrived, my dad was half passed out in the car. This happened in like the middle of broad day, like there's traffic everywhere. So when they finally get up to the car, my dad is literally slumped in the driver's seat. There was a bottle of whiskey in the door and it was completely empty. When they went to arrest him, he started resisting. He was screaming a bunch of profanities at them and started kicking them, threatening them with guns, which made the situation worse because my dad had no clue that there were any guns in the back of the car. So that just made the police think that they were his. So they take my dad to jail and he has like 7 charges against him. But we were happy because we knew where he was. Well, the worst part is, so the next day when I went to school, people were coming up to me asking if that was my dad on the news. Some people were even making fun of me because of what he did. And that's really fucking embarrassing for a 12-year-old. But it's okay, Dad, I still love you. Storytime about how I crashed my dad's really expensive car. So a little background information. My mom had just got remarried to my stepdad 3 years ago, and he was this rich asshole who owned a bunch of food trucks and thought he was the shit. Well, at the time I also had a boyfriend, and we had only been dating for like a month and a half. My boyfriend would always beg me to let him drive my stepdad's car, and I always said no because that was like his child. Like, he had children. He could care less about them. His car was more important. Anyway, so the one weekend my parents are out of town, and one of my friends was throwing a graduation party. So that whole day my boyfriend was trying to talk me into taking the car, and I already knew where my stepdad hid the keys. So I just decided I wouldn't drink that night and I would just take the car. He kept asking me if he could drive, but clearly I said no, because this kid literally told me that he crashed the first 2 cars that he had. So we get to the party, we're having a good time, and one of my friends tells me that everybody's taking pictures with my car outside. Like for part 2. Part 2 about how I crashed my dad's very expensive car. So like I said, everybody's taking pictures of the car, but I decided to let it go at first. I mean, there was one point where I went outside just so that way I could kind of let everybody know, hey, you're taking pictures with my car. Well, half an hour later, my boyfriend and I decided to leave, and he's obliterated. Like, we probably got 50 feet from her house, and then I had to stop the car so that way he could get out and throw up in somebody's yard. Anyway, so he gets in the car, we're on the way back to my house, and my house was like a 20-minute drive away. Well, we were 5 minutes from my house. At this one intersection, I get a green light and I go to make a right, and I accidentally hit a car turning out of the bar parking lot. So I'm literally freaking the fuck out. And my boyfriend's in the seat next to me crying for some reason. So the guy in the other car calls the cops. The cops show up, they call my stepdad and my mom. My boyfriend went to the hospital, he had alcohol poisoning. Well, my boyfriend told his mom that it was all my fault and I'm grounded for 6 months. Story time about how my neighbor killed my dog. So a little background information. When I was about 3 years old, my parents got me a German Shepherd. And my neighbors who lived next to us absolutely loved our dog. And so did their kids. Like, their dad literally put a doggy door in the fence, so that way our dog could go back and forth from our house to his house. Well, when I was about 8 years old, my neighbors decided to sell their house. So he told us that he had to take out the doggy door because the people that were buying his house hated animals. Well, the people who had just bought his house, they ended up moving in before he could take out the doggy door. So our new neighbors asked us if we could put like a piece of plywood in front of the door so that way our dog couldn't get through. And they said that they would do the same to their side of the fence. So my dad said, yeah, he put a piece of plywood in front of there. Well, my dog, Gabe, the one night that my brother let him out, he ended up getting the plywood off of the doggy door. Well, my brother literally had to crawl through the doggy door to get the dog before one of them saw him in the yard. Like part 2 about how my neighbors killed my dog. So like I said, my brother let the dog out, and my dog got the piece of plywood off of the door. And my brother had to crawl through the doggy door to get my dog out of our neighbor's yard, so that way our neighbors wouldn't wake up and know that he got through. But whenever my brother went to go get Gabe, he realized that my neighbors didn't even have a piece of plywood on their side of the fence or anything. So my brother told my dad, and my dad went over there the next day to talk to them. And he pretty much said, I'm not going to have a piece of fucking plywood on my side of the fence if you're not going to be doing anything on yours to prevent my dog from going into your yard. And they were like, oh, well, your old neighbors never took out the doggy door. And my dad was like, that's not our fucking fault. Well, then our new neighbors said, if your dog all of a sudden becomes sick or just does not come back, don't be surprised. My dad decided to replace the door himself. Well, once Gabe realized that the doggy door was gone, when we would let him outside, he would literally just sit there and bark at the fence. Well, 2 weeks later, Gabe ended up passing away, and we found out it's because our neighbors were giving him rat poison. Story time of why it's never good to be in a best friend group of 3. So a little background information. I was in 4th grade and I was 9 years old, about to turn 10. Now I know you're thinking, that's really young. Well, sis, I was just smart enough to see the red flags early on, unlike half of you who probably didn't see them. Anyway, so I had 2 friends we're going to call the one Becky and the one Mia. Now let me tell you a little bit about Becky. Becky was kind of a bitch. Now anytime that she saw Mia and I having our own conversation, she would pretty much bully us. And she would have 2 of her other friends tag along and do it also, Brooklyn and Riley. So the one day we're walking to PE and Mia and I are having a conversation. And in our gym class, you had to line up in groups of 3. So it would go Mia, Becky, and then me. Well, because I wanted to finish my conversation with Mia, I decided to sit in Becky's spot. So we're sitting down and then Becky marches over to where we're sitting and just stands there and stares at us. Then she walks away and goes and sits with her other friends. And at the end of gym class, she comes back over to us. Like for part 2. Part 2 about why it's never going to be in a best friend group of 3. So like I said, Brittany hated it whenever Mia and I would have our own conversation. And I sat in Becky's spot in gym class, and then she got mad at us because I wanted to finish my conversation with Mia. So she goes over with her other friends that literally bully Mia and I. So at the end of gym class, she walks up to both of us with Brooklyn. And she literally is just standing there. And then Brooklyn goes, do you need me to do it for you? Me and I look at each other like, what the fuck is going on? And then Brittany's like, no, I just wanted to tell you guys that I don't want to be friends with you anymore. She was like, you guys are just so fake. Like, you never include me in anything. Which was completely not true, but we were like, whatever. So then the next day at school, Brittany comes up to Mia and I, and she's like, hey guys. Like, this bitch was bipolar as fuck. And we're like, we thought you didn't want to be friends with us anymore. And she was like, no, I just meant I didn't want to be best friends. Story time about how my ex-boyfriend accused me of cheating on an all-girls trip. So a little background information, I was 14 or 15 around the time, and it was the summer of my freshman year. So within the last few weeks of my 8th grade year, one of the more popular boys asked me out, and we're gonna call him Carson. I wasn't like super popular at the school, but I was like a medium maybe. But I was raised in a super strict household, where the only phone that I pretty much had was one that was able to call 911 and my parents. And I especially was not allowed to be talking to boys. So Carson had the great idea of giving me his old phone, and throughout the summer, I would text him on there. Well, I started realizing him getting really toxic. Anytime that he would see my Snapchat location change, he would be like, where are you going? Why didn't you tell me you were going here? So I started distancing myself a little bit from him. Also because our relationship was just moving way too fast. Within the first month of us dating, he was talking about wanting to marry me. Like for part 2.